There is a silence that a man learns to recognize, not the quiet inside an empty church, not the stillness that follows the final ring of a bell, a distinct one, the kind that presses softly against the walls of a room and asks permission, very gently, to enter. Father Emmerich Vandelure had encountered that silence twice before the winter of 1923. On the third occasion, he ceased to be a priest. A brief word before we begin. If the sort of story I am about to tell is the kind you would wish to hear more of, not just one, but 10, each recounted completely, in a voice meant for the dark, there exists a collection, What the Mountain Keeps, 10 files from 10 counties, across 5 states, spanning 1893 to 1955. Everyone involved someone who walked into terrain that appeared simple, and everyone was officially closed with the wrong conclusion. 10 hours to sit within the darkness from beginning to end. The link is in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. Now then, before we ascend into that hollow, tell me where you find yourself tonight. What place holds you as you listen? A kitchen in the late hours, a porch, a vehicle, a bed, a room where the lighting is dim and the house has fallen quiet around you. Place it in the comments. I enjoy knowing who is accompanying me on this walk. I want you to envision him first. Father Vandelure was 47 that winter, not particularly tall nor short, broad-shouldered in the manner farm boys become broad, which was his origin before the seminary claimed him. His hair had turned gray early at the temples, like ash grays at the edges of a fire before the center realizes what is happening. His eyes were pale, nearly colorless, and he was conscious of the effect those eyes had on people. Over the years he had learned to temper them. He maintained a small parish outside Wheeling in those days. St. Ottillo of the Meadow, a brick church with a slate roof and a bell that had fractured twice and been recast twice. He conducted his masses, he heard confessions, he officiated burials. Nothing about him would have indicated the additional duties the diocese entrusted to him. The bishop had requested it, and Father Vandelure had consented. That was sufficient. He had studied the rite in Rome, he had assisted, then led, and eventually earned trust. By the winter of 1923, he had performed the greater rite of exorcism 11 times, once in Philadelphia, twice in Pittsburgh, 3 times in the coal region, and the remainder in locations most people cannot find on a map because the roads that once led there stopped doing so long ago. He kept a small ledger. He recorded each one. He did not include the specifics in the ledger. He inscribed the names. He inscribed the dates. He placed a small symbol beside each one in his own private shorthand, a cross if the individual had survived it and lived, a circle if they had not, a dash if the case had never truly concluded. He had 6 crosses. He had 4 circles, he had 1 dash, and on a Tuesday in early December of 1923, a letter arrived for him that would provide his 2nd dash. It came in an unfamiliar hand. The paper was cheap and brown, folded twice. The postmark indicated Verner Hollow, West Virginia, a place he had never heard of. The handwriting was deliberate, the letters upright and uniform, the kind a person develops when taught late in life and instructed only once. It contained 2 sentences. The first read, "My brother is dying." The second read, "He wants a priest who has performed the rite." There was no name, no signature. At the bottom of the page was an address that was not truly an address in the conventional sense. It was directions. Turn off the state road at the second creek, beyond the burnt mill. Follow the creek to the split rock. Take the left branch of the road, 2 miles. The house is the only one. Father Vandelure brought the letter to his bishop. His bishop was elderly by then, kind in the way old men become kind when they have ceased fearing the wrong things. He read the letter, he read it once more. He placed it on his desk and regarded it for a long while before speaking. He said, "You have to go." Father Vandelure replied, "I know." His bishop said, "You perceive something else about this as well. I can see it in you." Father Vandelure did not respond. He was not yet certain what he knew. He was only certain that the letter had arrived, that it was meant for him, and that the third silence he had spent his life listening for was waiting at the far end of those 2 sentences. He departed 3 days later. The train transported him as far as Wheeling. From Wheeling, he took another train to a town whose name I will omit, out of an old habit not mine to break. From that town he hired a horse and cart along with a driver, a lean man of perhaps 35 named Wendell Kreider, who did not question the priest's business in Verner Hollow, and spoke little during the journey. The road was iron that morning. That is the word Vandelure later used when he recorded it. Iron. The ground had frozen solid, and the ruts in the road had frozen within their own contours, and the cart produced a sound as it passed over them like a hammer at the far end of a long corridor. They traveled most of the morning. They paused once at a stream with ice at its edges, but water still flowing in the center, and the horse drank, and Wendell Kreider stood beside the horse and said, without turning, "You're the priest they sent for old Silas." Father Vandelure said, "I did not know his name until now." Wendell Kreider said, Father Vandelure asked, "You know him?" Wendell Kreider took a lengthy pause before answering. He placed his hand on the horse's flank and left it there. Finally, he said, "I've known his sister my whole life. I don't know him. Nobody does. I don't think he knows himself either." That was all he would offer, they continued. The hollow was the sort of place a person could pass twice in a day and fail to notice. The mountains encircling it were low, but they were folded oddly, layered upon themselves like paper folded by a nervous hand. The road entered through a gap between two ridges, and after that the sky contracted. The trees on either side were mostly oak and hickory, and the remaining leaves were the color of old copper. The rest had fallen. The rest lay on the road, and they produced no sound. That was what Vandelure observed first. He had walked through fallen leaves his entire life. Leaves make sound. These did not. He inquired of Wendell about it. Wendell said, "Yeah, that's how it is up here." He offered no further explanation. The house appeared where the directions had indicated. It was a two-story frame house, painted white long ago, and now more gray than white, with a wide front porch, a tin roof, and a small stone chimney at each end. There was a barn to one side, a well, a stone spring house, and a field beyond the barn that had been left fallow for a year or two. The tall, dead stalks of last summer's corn still stood in it, brittle in the wind. No other houses were visible. No other sound existed but the wind and the horse. A woman stood on the porch. She was tall. That was the first thing one noticed about her. Tall in the manner certain older women are tall, as if their spines had never learned apology. She was wrapped in a dark gray shawl, her hair white and pulled back, her face the color of paper exposed to sun. She watched them approach without moving. She did not wave. Wendell halted the cart at the base of the porch steps. He did not descend. Father Vandelure descended. He looked up at her. He said, "I am Father Emmerich Vandelure." She said, "I know." He said, "You wrote to me." She said, "I did." He said, "May I know your name?" She said, "Ruth Olinger. My brother is Silas. He's inside. He's unwell. He has been unwell for a long time. He wishes to make his confession. He wants it heard by a priest who has performed the rite." Father Vandelure said, "Why?" Ruth said, "You will have to ask him that. I do not ask him things." "I have not asked him things in nearly 40 years. She stepped aside. She held the door open. The interior of the house was warm. A wood stove burned in the front room, and heavy curtains were drawn over the windows. There was a smell in the air that was not any single thing, but seemed to be several combined. Beeswax, wet wool, old broth, and something beneath it all that Vandelure could not identify, which faintly reminded him of the scent inside an old stone church that had not been ventilated in a very long time. Not unpleasant, nor clean. Ruth Olinger led him through the front room, past a straight-back chair with a book of hymns on it, past a mantel holding 3 photographs he did not examine closely, and down a narrow hall to a door at the back of the house. She stopped at the door. She did not open it. She said, "He has good hours and bad hours. This is a good hour. You should go in. If he tires, come out. If I knock on the door, come out. Do not remain past dark tonight. Not for the confession. Tomorrow in daylight is when he wishes to speak it. Tonight is only to meet you." She looked at him, then truly looked at him. Her eyes were the same pale color as his own, which he had not anticipated. She said, "Father, one thing." He said, "Yes." She said, "When he speaks it, you must not respond to him. You must not tell him what he already knows. You must not utter the words of absolution until he has finished. Do you understand me?" He said, "I understand." She said, "I don't think you do, but you will." She turned and retreated down the hall. He opened the door. The room was small, a single bed, a chair beside it, a small table with a cup of water, a window with a curtain half drawn. A man lay in the bed. Silas Olinger was 74 that winter. In his working life, he had been a lay preacher at a small independent chapel 2 ridges over, before that a surveyor for the railroad, and before that a soldier for a brief time in a war that had ended before he was old enough to grasp what he had gone off to do. He had never married. He had lived in this house with his sister Ruth for most of his adult life. He had not been seen by anyone from the county in nearly 4 years. That is what Father Vandelure learned later. That is not what he saw when he entered the room. What he saw was an elderly man in a bed, small, wasted, skin drawn tight against the bones of the skull, hair thin and white and slightly damp at the temples. His hands were folded on top of the quilt, and the hands were the most peculiar part. The hands were not those of a 74-year-old man. The hands were smooth. The skin on the backs of the hands was smooth, in a way the skin of the face was not. As if the hands had been preserved from the years, as if years had around them. Silas opened his eyes. The eyes were clear, gray, fully aware. He said, "Father." Father Vandelure said, "Mr. Olinger." Silas said, "Sit." Father Vandelure sat. They regarded each other for a long time, long enough that if a clock had been in the room, it would have completed a full minute of ticking and begun a second. There was no clock in the room. Vandelure noted that as well. In a house that old, in a room used by a man who could no longer leave his bed, there was no clock. Finally, Silas said, "You've performed the rite." Father Vandelure said, 11 times. Silas said, "How many of them worked?" Father Vandelure said, "I do not answer that question. I have never answered it." Silas smiled. It was a small smile, not unkind. He said, "You will." Father Vandelure said, "Not tonight." Silas Olinger said, "No, not tonight. Tomorrow in the light. When I can see your face and you can see mine. Tonight only sit. I want to know what you sound like when you are saying nothing." They sat. Ruth Olinger did not come to the door. The light in the window shifted slowly from gray to a paler gray to nearly nothing. Father Vandelure, who had sat with dying individuals for 20 years, understood that this was not the sitting of a dying man. This was something else. This was a man measuring him. This was a man who had waited a long time for a particular kind of listener and was ensuring before he began that the listener could endure it. At some point, Silas closed his eyes. At some point after that, Vandelure understood he had been dismissed. He stood. He walked to the door. He placed his hand on the doorknob. Silas Olinger said, without opening his eyes, "Father." Vandelure said, "Yes." Silas Olinger said, "When you leave this room tonight, walk straight out. Do not pause in the hall. Do not look at the pictures on the mantel. My sister will feed you. Sleep in the room she gives you. If you hear something in the night, do not rise. That is important. Do not rise." Vandelure said, "All right," Silas said. "Good night, Father." Vandelure stepped into the hall. He closed the door behind him. He walked down the hall. He did not look at the pictures on the mantel. He walked out to the front room where Ruth Olinger stood at the stove with her back to him, stirring something in a black pot. She did not turn around. She said, "Wash up. There's water in the basin in the back room. Supper is in a few minutes." He washed. He ate. A stew of some kind, dark bread, a small piece of cheese, hot cider. They ate at a small table in the front room. She did not talk. He did not ask her to. After supper, she said, "You'll sleep upstairs." "First door on the left. There's a lamp. Blow it out before you sleep. Do not sleep with a lamp burning in this house." He said, "Why not?" She looked at him. She said, "You've come this far, Father. Trust me on the small things." He said, "All right." He went upstairs. The room was small and clean and cold. A narrow bed, a washstand, a crucifix on the wall above the bed, which surprised him. A chair with his valise on it, which he did not recall bringing up. Someone had brought it while he was eating. He undressed slowly. He knelt beside the bed. He recited his usual prayers. He got into the bed. He blew out the lamp. He listened for a long time. He heard only the wind and the settling beams of the old house, and once far off a dog. Then he heard from downstairs, from the back of the house, the sound of Silas's door opening. Then the sound of it closing. Then footsteps in the hall. Then footsteps on the stairs. Then footsteps in the upstairs hall coming toward his room. Then the footsteps stopped outside his door. He did not rise. He remembered what Silas had said. He did not rise. He heard breathing on the other side of the door. He heard the doorknob turn very slowly, not forcefully, not testing, just turning it all the way and holding it there. as if the person on the other side was waiting to see if he would react. He did not react. The doorknob returned to its resting position. The footsteps retreated down the hall. The footsteps went back down the stairs. The door at the back of the house opened and closed, and then there was quiet. And Father Vandelure, who had performed the rite 11 times and had heard the third silence twice before in his life, understood that he was hearing it now for the third time. He did not sleep, but he did not rise. In the morning at breakfast, Ruth Olinger poured him coffee and did not mention the night. He did not mention it either. He said, "Your brother said he wanted a confession in daylight. What hour does he mean by daylight?" She said, 10. When the sun comes over the ridge and gets in his window, he'll ring the small bell by the bed when he's ready. "Go in when you hear it," he said. "Miss Olinger, may I ask you a question?" She said, "You may ask, I may not answer," he said. Last night, there were footsteps in the hall. She looked at him. She did not answer at once. She stirred her coffee, though she took it black. She said, "My brother has not been out of that bed in 3 years, Father." He said, "I know." She said, "So no, there were no footsteps in the hall last night," he said. "All right," she said, "eat. Let me pause here for a moment. A breath before what comes next. If this is the kind of case you would wish to sit with in the dark, not merely hear once, but retain, there is a collection I assembled with the people at Forbidden Unresolved Stories. What the Mountain Keeps, 10 complete cases, 8 hours, 62 years of records nobody wanted to finish. Each one located, dated, and closed with a tidy word that never once fit what occurred. The link is in the description below and at the top of the comments. And if you have ever had that feeling, the feeling of a doorknob turning slowly in a house that is not yours, tell me. Not the loudest thing you can recall, the quiet one. The one that returns on winter nights when nothing else is happening. Place it in the comments. Sometimes those are the ones I think about longest. Let's return to it. The sun came over the ridge a little after 10. Vandelure heard the small bell. He had spent the 2 hours prior in the front room with his breviary open on his knee. Though he was not reading it, he was preparing himself. That is what he told himself. In truth, he was doing what he always did before the rite. He was making himself very small. He was making himself very still. He was reminding himself of the one thing he believed above all else, that the priest is not the strength in the room. The priest is only the doorway. Whatever comes through him comes from the other side of him. His job is to keep the doorway open. His job is not to speak. He walked down the hall. He did not look at the pictures on the mantel this time either. He opened the door of the room at the back. Silas Olinger was sitting up in the bed. The sun was on his face, coming in through the window as Ruth had said it would. He looked in that light both worse and better than he had looked the night before. Worse because the sun made no concession for the sunken places in his face. Better because his eyes were those of a man who had made up his mind. He said, "Father." Vandelure said, "Mr. Olinger." Silas said, "A visitor last night." Vandelure said, "I did." Silas said, "You did not get up." Vandelure said, "I did not get up." Silas said, "Good. That was the test. If you had gotten up, I would have sent you home this morning. There is no confession for a man who gets up. You will hear me because you did not get up." He motioned to the chair. Vandelure sat. Silas said, "Do you know why my sister told you not to look at the pictures on the mantel?" Vandelure said, "No." Silas said, "Because 2 of them are not who she says they are, and I don't want you distracted. Not by that. Not before." Vandelure said, "All right." Silas said, "Put your stole on, Father." Vandelure took the violet estrel from his valise. He kissed the small embroidered cross at its center. He placed it around his neck. He crossed himself. He said, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." Silas said, "Amen." Silas said, "Father, my last confession was in the year of our Lord, 1886, in a chapel that is no longer there, to a preacher who is no longer alive. I have not confessed in 37 years. There are reasons for that. I will tell you the reasons. When I have finished, you will do what you were sent to do, or you will not. I will not hold it against you either way." Vandelure said, "Say what you need to say." Silas closed his eyes. He said, "In the summer of 1884, in the 2nd year, I had a farm of my own. The corn burned in the field. It burned twice. In June from the sun. In August from a fire that started I don't know how. Though I have thought about it every day since. I had a mortgage. I had a note at the bank in town. I had a sister living with me because our parents were dead by then and there was no one else. If I lost the farm, we would have gone on the county. Do you know what the county was in 1884? Father Vandelure said, I have some idea. Silas said, you have some idea, yes. So, there was a man in the hollow in those days, not in this hollow, in the next one. His name I will not say. His name was not a name people like to say, and I have not said it out loud in almost 40 years, and I am not going to say it now because if I say it in this room, the room will hear me, you understand? Vandelure said. I understand. Silas said, I went to him not for money, not for gold, nothing like that. I went to him because there was a thing he could do that people who had been to him could do afterwards. He could put a small thing into the ground of a farm. He could put it under the corner post of the barn, or under the sill of the front door, or into the mouth of the well. And when the small thing was in the ground, the farm did not fail. Not that year, not the year after. Not ever until the man of the farm was ready to give it up. Vandelure did not to speak. This is the thing to remember about him in this moment. He did not speak. Ruth had told him not to speak. Silas had told him not to speak. He did not speak. Silas said, I gave him what he asked. It was not a large thing. It was not a soul. Father, I want to say that plainly. Nothing so large. It was a smaller thing. It was a piece of the smaller life a man lives inside the bigger one. A piece of the time you spend on the porch in the last hour of the day. A piece of the quiet in your own kitchen when no one is talking. A piece of the sleep of a man who is not afraid. He took that from me. He put the small thing under the sill of my door, and my farm did not fail. Silas opened his eyes. He looked at Vandelure. He said, that is the first thing I have to confess. That is the small thing. That is the thing I could have confessed to any preacher. That is not why you are here. Vandelure still did not speak. Silas said, when I was 41 years old in 1890, I was called to a house 4 ridges from here. A cousin of mine on my mother's side, a woman named Althea Rolfing. She had married a man from up there. Her husband had died in the spring. Since his death, she had been troubled, not sick, troubled. The kind of trouble a preacher can smell before he can name. The chapel had no one to send. They sent me because I was a lay preacher then, and because I was blood. I did not do the right, Father. I did not know the right. But I did what I had learned from other men. From what I had read of other men. I prayed over her. I read the Psalms over her. I laid my hand on her forehead, and I called on the name that is supposed to make these things go, and it worked. Father, I want to tell you it worked. She sat up. She looked at me clear. She said, thank you. She lived another 22 years. She died in bed of a bad heart, ordinary. A death like most deaths. Silas swallowed. He said, I went home that night. I slept a good sleep. In the morning I went out to the barn to feed the horse, and there was something in the barn. Not a shape, not a figure. Something in the corner of my eye, in the corner of the barn, in the place where the 2 beams meet the loft. Something waiting, something that was pleased to see me, not glad pleased, like a guest at a door. Vandelure, who understood now what he was hearing, held very still. Silas said, I did not think that first day about the small thing under the sill of my door. I did not connect them. Why would I? One was in 1884 and the other was in 1890. But over that year and the year after, I began to notice that anywhere I had prayed a bad thing out of a person, the bad thing came home with me. And where did it go, Father? Where do you think it went? It went under the sill of my door. It went to the small thing that was already there, and the small thing kept them. The small thing was a house for them. My farm did not fail because my farm was a house for them. Silas opened his hands on the quilt. The smooth backs of the hands were turned up. The palms were up. The palms were rough, he said. For 33 years, Father, I have been the doorway. Not the priest at the door itself. Every time I went out to a house where there was trouble, and I did what I had learned to do, the trouble came home with me. And under the sill of my door, there is a small thing that is not small anymore. Vandelure still did not speak. Silas said, that is not the confession, Father. That is only the outside of it. That is the part I could have told a man who was a stranger to what I am telling you. Now I am going to tell you the inside of it. I am going to tell you the part that is for you. Because you are here, because you have performed the rite 11 times. Because you are the one my sister wrote for. Silas leaned forward. It cost him. The bones of him moved under the loose skin. He said, Father, I will tell you what the man in the next hollow told me in the summer of 1884, when I asked him what the small thing was that he was going to put under the sill of my door. He said, "It is a listener." He said, "It listens for a name." He said, "You will not know the name, but the small thing will know it. And when the small thing hears the name spoken over your roof, the small thing will open. And what is on the other side of the name will come, and it will stay." He said, "You will not have to feed it. It will feed on the fact of you, and after you it will feed on the fact of the next." Silas paused. He was struggling for breath. Vandelure reached for the water on the small table and held it to his lips. Silas drank. Silas said, "Thank you, Father." Silas said, "The name, Father, the name it listens for. I did not know it in 1884. I did not know it in 1890 when I first prayed over my cousin. I know it now. It has been 33 years. And I know it now. And I know it because the small thing under my sill has been saying it quietly every night for 33 years, and eventually a man learns to hear." Silas smiled. He said, "The name is the name of the rite you have performed. Father, the name is the Latin word your bishop taught you. The name is the name that means in your church to cast out." Silas closed his hand around Vandelure's wrist. The hand was very cold. Vandelure did not pull away. Silas said, "Every time you have performed the rite, Father, you have not cast anything out. There is no out. You have opened a door, and on the other side of that door there is a small thing under the sill of a house. And the small thing knows your name now. And the small thing has kept the thing you thought you cast out. And the small thing is not under a sill in this hollow only, Father. Do you understand me? There is a small thing under a sill in 11 houses, in 11 towns, in 11 counties, in 11 states, wherever you have said the words. And they are all keeping. And what they are keeping is not gone. It is only kept." Silas let go of his wrist. He said, "That is my confession, Father. I did not know when I began. I know now. I have kept it here for the last 4 years because I did not know who to give it to. My sister wrote to your bishop because I told her to. Your bishop sent you because he did not know any of this, and because he thought this was a dying old man asking for a priest who could handle the smell of the room. And he was right about the smell of the room, Father, and he was wrong about the rest." Silas said, "Now say the absolution or do not. I will not hold it against you either way. I am tired. I am going to sleep. When I wake up, if I wake up, my sister will tell me what you said." He closed his eyes. Father Emmerich Vandelure sat in the chair with his violet stole around his neck for a very long time. He did not say the absolution. He did not say anything at all. After some length of time he did not measure. He stood. He folded his stole. He placed it back in his valise. He walked to the door. He walked down the hall. This time on the way out he did look at the pictures on the mantel. There were 3 pictures. The one in the middle was Ruth Olinger and Silas Olinger standing together in front of the house, in what looked like the summer of perhaps 1892, both of them young, Ruth's hair not yet white, Silas standing straight, his hands at his sides, and his hands already in that picture already. Smooth in a way the rest of him was not. The picture on the left was a man in a soldier's coat. The picture on the right was also a man in a soldier's coat, but it was a different soldier's coat, and it was not, when Vandelure looked closely, from a war he could name. Ruth was standing in the front room when he came out. She had her back to the stove and her hands folded in front of her. She looked at him and saw whatever she needed to see and nodded once. She said, "You didn't say it." He said, "No." She said, "Good." He said, "Miss Olinger, the 2 pictures on the mantel, the soldiers." She said, "One of them is our older brother. He went to the war in 1862 and did not come back. The other one," she did not look at him now, only at her own hands. "The other one is not our brother. It has been on the mantel since the summer of 1891. I did not put it there." Silas did not put it there. "It came in the night. I have taken it down 11 times. It comes back." I stopped taking it down. He said, 11. She said, "Yes." He said, "When was the last time?" She said, "The morning of the day your letter reached us saying you were coming." He said, "All right." He said nothing else. He picked up his coat from the peg by the door. He put it on. He picked up his valise. He looked at her one more time. She said, "Do not come back, Father. You do not owe us a return," he said. "I know," she said, "and do not, please do not perform the rite again, not one more time. If you do it once more, we will feel it, my brother and I, under our sill." That is how we will know you have done it. That is how we will know what house it has gone to. He said, I will not perform the rite again. She said, thank you. He went out. Wendell Kreider was waiting at the foot of the porch steps with the cart. He did not ask what had happened inside. He waited for Vandelure to climb up. He clucked to the horse. They went down the road. At the split rock, Wendell said, without turning, he told you then. Vandelure said, yes. Wendell said, every 10 years or so, somebody comes up out of that hollow with that look on them. My father brought a man out of there in 1911 with that same look. Never asked him what it was. Not once. My father died 2 years later in his sleep in his own bed. And I like to think it was on account of him not asking. Vandelure said, that is probably wise. Wendell said, yes, sir, I thought so. They rode. Father Vandelure was gone from that hollow by dark. He was back in Wheeling within the week. He said Mass on the Sunday. He said the Mass carefully and slowly, and he did not, at the elevation, look up at the wooden crucifix above the altar. He could not have said why. He only knew he could not. He kept his parish through the winter and into the spring. He did not tell his bishop what Silas had said. He did not know how to tell it. He did not know, honestly, whether he believed it. He knew only 2 things. He knew that he had not said the absolution over a dying man for the first time in his life, and he knew that he had made a promise to Ruth Olinger, and that of the 2 things he was more afraid of breaking the promise than he was of the sin. The bishop asked once over supper in the rectory if he wanted to speak about the case. Father Vandelure said no. The bishop said all right. The bishop said, you know, Emmerich, there is no shame in setting the ledger down. Father Vandelure said, I know, that was in February of 1924. In April, when the ground was soft again, a request came to the diocese from a family in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Their oldest cousin, a woman of 61, was troubled in her mind and in her house. And the local priest, a good man who knew the difference between his own vocabulary and the one this required, had asked the bishop to send someone who had performed the rite. The bishop called Father Vandelure into his office. The bishop said, I would like to send you. Father Vandelure said, the bishop said, are you ill? Father Vandelure said, no. The bishop said, then explain. Father Vandelure said, I cannot. I only know that I am not able to go. The bishop looked at him for a long time. The bishop said, Emmerich, is this because of Verner Hollow? Father Vandelure said, yes. The bishop said, will you tell me what happened there? Father Vandelure said, no. The bishop said, all right. Not today, some other day. Father Vandelure said, no, your grace, not some other day, never. I cannot tell you what happened there. Not because I do not trust you, because I promised. And because I do not know how to say it in a way that will not do harm. The bishop said, to whom? Father Vandelure said, to the next house. The bishop, who was a good man and old, and had lived long enough to know when a subject had reached its edge, did not press. The bishop said, all right, Emmerich. The bishop sent someone else to Hazleton. Father Vandelure said Mass through the summer of 1924. He heard confessions. He buried a woman named Wilhelmina Kerr in June, and a man named August Rennenbrink in August. He performed a wedding in September for 2 people he had known since they were young. He walked out to the edge of the cemetery on the Sundays when there was nothing to do, and stood there with his hands behind his back, and looked at the stones and thought about what he could not tell. In October, he wrote a letter to his bishop. The letter was 1 page long. The letter did not say what had happened in the hollow. The letter did not say what Silas had confessed. The letter did not say anything about a small thing under a sill. It said only that Father Emmerich Vandelure of St. Otto of the Meadow was returning his faculties for the greater rite of exorcism, that he was, as a matter of conscience, no longer able to say the words, that he wished no dishonor to the office, that he begged the bishop's forgiveness, that he would continue, if the bishop willed, as a parish priest, and would say his masses and hear his confessions and bury his dead, but that the door in him that had opened to the rite was closed. He did not say why. He said only that it was closed. The bishop accepted the letter without asking a question. Father Vandelure remained at St. Otto of the Meadow for another year. Then in the fall of 1925 he wrote a second letter. The second letter was shorter than the first. The second letter said that Father Emmerich Vandelure of St. Otto of the Meadow was requesting laicization. that he was leaving the priesthood entirely, that he did not do so for reasons of scandal, or of a woman, or of despair, that he had come through slow means to a place where he no longer trusted the shape of what he had been trained to do, that he did not wish to speak the words of any rite of the church, small or great, ever again, that he was leaving quietly, that he wished no one harm. He was 50 years old. He left the rectory in November of 1925. He took with him one suitcase, one coat, one hat, one small book of psalms that had been his mother's, and the ledger with the 11 names in it. He took nothing else. He went of all places to Nebraska. I do not know why he went to Nebraska. Neither did he. If the letters he wrote to his old bishop over the next 20 years are anything to judge by. He said in one of them that he wanted flat country. He said in another that he wanted a horizon so open that any small thing that came near it would have nowhere to hide. He said in a third that it did not matter where he went, only that it was far, and the truth is Nebraska is far. If you have been there, you know. He took a job as a bookkeeper for a feed store in a town called Bowles. He kept that job for 19 years. He rented a room over the store. He read in the evenings. He walked in the summers out onto the fields at dusk and watched the sky do the long, slow business of losing its color. He did not go to Mass. He did not, so far as anyone in Bowles knew, pray. He did not marry. He did not speak of his old life. He was a quiet man, a man of habits, well-liked in a distant way, the kind of man people said after he was gone that they had not really known. He kept the ledger. In the ledger over the years he made one more mark. Sometime in 1928, the exact date is not recorded. He opened the ledger. He turned to the page where he had written the 6 crosses and the 4 circles and the 1 dash. He turned to the entry for a woman in Pittsburgh whose case in 1899 had been marked with a cross. Someone had come back to visit that house, he had heard, in the winter of 1927. Not the same thing, something like it. The family had had to move. He put a small mark next to that cross. Not a circle, not a dash, a small underline in the same ink. He did the same over the years for other entries, never one at a time, in batches as news reached him. As letters from old parishioners and old friends came and went, by 1941, of the 11 entries in the ledger, 7 of them had that small underline. The other 4 he could not verify. He assumed the underline for them too. He did not write it. He did not want to write what he did not know. In 1944 he retired from the feed store. He was 68. He moved at that point into a smaller room in a boarding house on the edge of the town, run by a widow named Hedwig Sauer, who did not ask him questions and did not offer opinions, and let him take his supper alone at a small table by the kitchen window. He wrote in the summer of 1946 a single letter to Ruth Olinger of Verner Hollow, West Virginia. He did not know if she was still alive. He addressed it in care of the postmaster at the town 2 ridges over. The letter was 1 sentence long. The letter said, "I have kept my word." He did not sign it. He received 3 weeks later a reply. The reply was also 1 sentence. The reply said, "We felt it." The handwriting was the same careful, upright hand he had first seen in the letter that came for him in the winter of 1923. The hand of a woman who had been taught late in life and taught only once. He placed both letters, his and hers, in the back of the ledger. He never wrote to her again. He lived 7 more years. He died in his sleep in the spring of 1953 at the age of 77. Hedwig Sauer found him in the morning when he did not come down for breakfast. He was lying on his side in the narrow bed in his nightshirt, his hands folded on top of the blanket, and the ledger was on the table by the bed. And on the table by the bed, beside the ledger, was a single unopened envelope with no address on it and nothing inside. Hedwig Sauer did not know what to do with the ledger. She sent it at the suggestion of the pastor of the local Lutheran church to the diocese in Wheeling. The bishop by then was not the bishop who had known him. The ledger was placed eventually in a locked cabinet in an archive that no one in particular looked into. That is where I found it. Or rather, that is where a friend of mine found it in the summer of 2019, in the course of doing something else. The 11 entries, the 6 crosses and the 4 circles and the 1 dash, the 7 underlines, the 2 letters, 1 out and 1 back, tucked into the back cover. A note in the same hand as the entries. Father Vandelure's own, written on the inside of the front cover in ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. The note said, "The rite does not remove. The rite relocates. There is a small thing under a sill somewhere for each of these names." I did not know when I began. I know now. If you are reading this, and if you are a man of my old profession, and if you are about to say the words, "Put this book down, walk out, do not come back." That is what it said, word for word. I am giving it to you the way a friend of mine copied it on a folded piece of paper in the summer of 2019 in an archive that does not particularly know it has this book. Now I do not know, and you do not know, and Father Vandelure, wherever he is, may or may not know whether Silas Olinger of Verner Hollow told him the truth. There are people who will tell you the truth of it is unimportant, that a man who leaves the priesthood after 20 years and lives out 19 more as a bookkeeper in Nebraska has already been through the only test that matters. That the truth of the rite is not, in the end, something that gets settled by argument, that we call things by the wrong names all the time, that a man who spent his life opening doors and then spent the rest of his life not opening them was, in some real sense, doing the same work backwards, and that whatever he was on either side of the door, he was faithful to it. I do not argue with those people. I only tell you what is in the ledger. I tell you that in the winter of 1923, a priest went up into a hollow in West Virginia to hear a confession, and that he came back different, and that a woman who had known him only long enough to feed him one supper and one breakfast made him a promise and made him keep it, and that he kept it for the rest of his life. I tell you that there is a house, or there was a house, in Verner Hollow, and under the sill of the front door of that house, there is a small thing, or there was a small thing, that had 33 years' worth of what other men called their exorcisms in it before Father Emmerich Vandelure ever set foot on the porch. I tell you that after Father Vandelure, so far as the ledger knows, no one else went up into that hollow to hear anyone's confession. Ruth Olinger outlived her brother. She died according to a small notice in a wheeling paper in the summer of 1959. The house, according to a county survey of 1964, was still standing then. According to a state road survey of 1981, the road that used to leave the Second Creek past the burnt mill and go up to the Split Rock, and past it did not go anywhere by then. It was gone under briars. A different survey team in 2006 could not find the road at all. They could find the Split Rock. They could not find what came after. I tell you that if you are in your life the sort of person who has a doorway in you of whatever kind, you know what a doorway is. And you know that on either side of a doorway there is more than you can see at once, and that a doorway is not a decision. A doorway is a fact. What you do with it is the decision. Father Emmerich Vandelure, in the winter of 1923, in a small back bedroom in a farmhouse in West Virginia, made a decision. He was not sure if the decision was right. He kept it anyway. He kept it for 30 years. That is, I think, what the story is really about. Not the small thing under the sill, not the 11 names in the ledger, not the picture on the mantle that came back every time it was taken down. Those are the shapes it happened to take. The story is about a man who, having spent his whole life saying certain words, one afternoon did not say them and never said them again. That, the last page of the ledger, the very back page after the 2 letters, is blank except for one line at the bottom in the same hand as everything else, in the same faded ink. The line reads, "The 12th would have been on a Tuesday, that is all. No date, no place, no name, only that." I have looked at it a long time. I have shown it to a few people I trust. None of us know what it means. It could be the case he refused in the spring of 1924. It could be a case he was writing in his head all those years in Nebraska. A case that would have been if he had not walked out of the priesthood. It could be a case that came to him in a dream and would not leave him. Or it could be, and this is the reading that keeps me awake sometimes, that Father Vandelure understood at some point in his long, slow retirement in that flat and open country that the 11 small things he had put under 11 sills were not, in the end, going to stay where he had put them. That some Tuesday, somewhere in a year, he would not live to see. A 12th house would come to be, in the same way a candle lights a candle, and that the door he had closed inside himself would not by itself close the door in the world. I do not know. I am not a priest. I do not know the words. I would not say them if I did. But I think of him sometimes in that boarding house in Bowles, in that narrow bed, in that flat country. I think of him lying on his side with his hands folded on the blanket. I think of him hearing at some low hour of the night out on the plains, out where the wind has nothing to hide behind, a sound that might have been the wind, and might not. I think of him listening for a doorknob. I think of him not getting up. And you who have listened this far, you who are in the kitchen at a late hour, or in the car on a long road, or in the room where the light is low, I want you to tell me one thing before we stop. Not the loud thing, the quiet one. Tell me about a night when you heard something in your house that could not have been there. Tell me about the door you did not open. Tell me about the hand you kept flat on the blanket and the breath you kept still, and the moment you decided, without deciding, that some doorknobs turn on their own, and it is not in the end your business to say why. Place it below. I read them all. They are sometimes the reason I do this. If this one held you, stay with me for the next. There is another file open on my desk already. Another county, another year, another word the law used in its report that never once fit what happened. Until then, keep a low light on tonight if you need it. And if you hear the house settle in that particular way. A house settles when it is not settling. If you hear the beams talk to each other and then go quiet, do not get up. Good night.